it's me who's going to lead the broadcast. Clearly, not the kind of openings you'll are used to, given that Sawmill Arora usually is here. But he's actually down with a bad throat. And Sundaram, you were down with a bad throat a couple of days ago as well. And then Sarang was down, our producer as well. There used to always be the saying that you can fall sick as long as it's outside of the season calendar. Okay. And all you guys had this 3 week break between Silverstone and Spa, and you all managed to fall sick right in the week of Spa, which is all, which is also why this is a sprint qualifying live stream, but also the race preview for this weekend. But how are you doing, and how's that throat? Let's hear you crackle it up.
I am much better, if that sounds good. And I'm glad that I've kind of recovered to some extent before the race weekend actually gets underway. I know what you mean. We usually plan all our other stuff around the racing season. My mom often tends to ask me, when are we traveling? I said, okay, mid-season break or in the winter break. But yeah, everything revolves around F1. But yes, we should have had Samuel for today's episode. We needed that little bit of drama because it was quite the dramatic qualifying, a very interesting sprint qualifying in my opinion, because quite a few surprises, quite a few eliminations, and quite a few interesting Q3 appearances as well. So let's get down to breaking down all of that.
Yes. So just to list down everything you said, I'm going to lay it down. What are we actually going to discuss? So Oscar Piastri sprint pole and that mega gap, 0.477 to Max Verstappen, but even more so, 6 tenths gap to Lando Norris. The key thing I want to talk about, Sundaram, is Lando Norris's reaction after Oscar Piastri humiliated him in sprint qualifying. I'm going to use that word humiliated because 6 tenths is massive. And like you said, it's not that Lando Norris visibly made a mistake. He made a mistake in Canada. He made a mistake in Jeddah. He made a mistake in several other qualifying sessions that he's had. It's not that he made a mistake. He was just slow. Okay, I know that hurts. I know that that pinches or that whatever burns. So that's what we're going to talk about. Then we're going to talk about Mercedes's double elimination or double no show in Q3, SQ3, whatever
A rare
Q3
one,
is, a
rare
rare
one.
one. Yeah, I'm sure you know exactly how many months, days, weeks, seconds it's been since their last time they were not both cars in SQ3. So we'll get to that. Then of course Lewis Hamilton's spin. Was it him? Was it the car? Because Ham4C, as they love to call themselves, is convinced there's something broken with the car. Several broadcasters have been asking, was it the car? Was it the driver? And Lewis just came out of the car and said, I spun. I locked the rears. It's never happened to me before, and I spun. So, instead of mourning his SQ1 exit, suddenly people are like, you know what, forget that. Let's just debate and discuss why that happened. So that's that. We will. I think my biggest win point for this qualifying session was there were so many midfield drivers in play in SQ3, right? Because so many got eliminated before, and then suddenly everyone jumped in there. We'll do a bit of a circuit preview because this is the most fantastic racing circuit ever. I mean, there. And then let's discuss what actually happens, what are the scenarios we could see play out in the sprint race and qualifying tomorrow.
Yep, let's do it. I think let's start off with the circuit characteristics. If since you mentioned about Oscar Piastri's huge pole margin, and I think everyone needs to understand one very important aspect. The thing is, Spa-Francorchamps is a long circuit, and over a longer circuit, the gaps also tend to be longer. If you go to a Red Bull Ring and when you go to Austria, since the fact that it's the shortest lap time, the margins are also more smaller. But when there is quite clearly a difference in the pace of all these cars over an entire 7 kilometer circuit, that tends to be more pronounced. So 4 tenths and 6 tenths to Lando Norris does seem big, but when you kind of generalize it, it seems a little smaller. But yes, when you highlighted what Norris's reaction to Piastri was, I was actually baffled because this year or even in last year's cases, whenever we've seen Norris not kind of put the car on pole, you've very visibly we've been able to single out certain issues, little mistakes here and there, or locking up of the wheel or something of that sort. Today, I don't think he made a mistake or any major mistake throughout today's qualifying, and it just seemed that Piastri was flying. Um, And I was really interested to see how Piastri performs in this weekend, especially after what happened at Silverstone, the way he ended that Silverstone race, how he bounces back. And coming out with a 4/10 gap over Verstappen, over Lando Norris, is a statement in itself.
It is. I'm going to actually just be a little cheeky. You nicely compared Red Bull Ring versus Spa-Francorchamps, circuit lengths, qualifying gaps. Interestingly, this year's qualifying at the Red Bull Ring for the Austrian Grand Prix, Lando Norris had a 4/10 gap to Leclerc. So short circuit, but he still pulled that. And then a 6/10 gap or thereabouts to Oscar Piastri. So this is Oscar Piastri just just claiming it back, saying, you know what, I'm going to pull that 6/10 off. But I think the way in which Piastri pulled the gap was phenomenal because he just knew how to work his car to its strengths, and he knew where that middle sector, which is where he sort of pulled that massive gap to Max Verstappen. I'm going to just say two things about Lando Norris. The minute Lando Norris was asked about the gap, Lando said, "It's just Friday. I'm going to work harder with my team." And he's often had this habit of brushing it away, and maybe that's his coping mechanism, or clearly it is his coping mechanism. But and it's not to say it's disrespectful. I'm sure he and Oscar in person have spoken about how fantastic Oscar's performance was. But when Lando, who's in the title fight, who got gifted that win in Silverstone, who who needs every point he can and finish starting every
I
race
like how
ahead.
you said gifted. I like how you said
He
gifted.
was gifted it. I'm going to town still with this, but Lando Norris just saying it's just Friday, and I think that's a bit of a strange reaction, at least for me. But so that was the Lando Norris thing. The other thing I believe what's happened is Martin Brundle pointed this out. I'm told Lando didn't think it was a big deal, but it was very interesting. It was in. I'm reading my race notes here. There's a run plan because it's a sprint qualifying. There's fewer laps, fewer tires to use. So you literally just have, Fianshu's pointing out Oscar didn't get a second run in Austria. Yes, that's also correct. But, just pointing out, they all pretty much have one run. Even more so in
Yeah.
SQ3, shorter time, just one set of soft tires that you get to use, etc. And, you know, Max Verstappen was released between those McLaren cars, and it seems that Lando Norris actually ran his outlap much faster than Oscar Piastri. Okay, and which is why when he started his qualifying lap, he did not have as much tire grip as he would have liked
Hmm.
in the opening part of his lap. Just goes to show the finer margins at play. How Red Bull is still cheeky, keeps playing these games as they should. But Lando himself said, I was just not quick enough. It was got nothing to do with the out lap. It was actually on the hot lap. But
Yeah.
that means Oscar Piastri now has outqualified Lando Norris in all three sprint qualifyings. That's what I sort of found out. And that in SQ2 where there was 400s that saw him almost being knocked out, right? I think that's a very strange place to have track limits. You're on the inside of the corner and no, all four wheels are still off the track. But anyway, it
It
is
happens to me
what.
all the time on the game. Whenever I'm playing the game, that's the one corner I'm always cutting.
But if we can switch to Oscar Piastri, sorry, to Max Verstappen now, because doesn't matter which is a power unit in the car, doesn't matter who's leading the team, doesn't matter who the teammate is, doesn't matter who my race engineer is. I will be on the ball. I will be chasing those McLarens, and I'll be making life difficult for them. And guess what? That's what Max Verstappen did. P2, front row, going to chase down everyone that he possibly can. He's anyway the master of the sprint weekends with maximum sprint victories over everyone else in the history of sprint races. I'd love to see an Oscar Piastri versus Max Verstappen for the sprint again, even if it's fewer points, fewer laps. Let's remember Max has very little to lose, and at a
Yeah.
circuit like Spa-Francorchamps, I don't believe McLaren's rear tire management, magic is going to be that one decisive factor like we've seen them in some of the other circuits, Sundaram.
Yeah. No, exactly. And we often tend to talk about Charles Leclerc being an incredible one lap driver when it comes to qualifying, and we've seen Piastri also kind of up his game when it comes to qualifying. And we've seen Verstappen do that in qualifying over the past couple of seasons, but this year, quite clearly, when the car isn't the fastest, we are seeing him do this time and again. At times when we don't expect them to be at the sharp end of the field, Max Verstappen is able to put that on pole position. And him actually dissecting both the McLarens is a very interesting read of, I wouldn't say exactly where the car is. It's just a very interesting read of what Max Verstappen can do, especially when, like, I like to repeat that, especially around a long circuit. There's so many places where you can kind of lose the car around a long circuit, and he's managed to exactly be 2 tenths quicker than Lando Norris, and that's a very important point. And Piastri's literally been 2 tenths quicker than Lando across all sectors. But imagine Verstappen being quicker in sector one and sector three as well. So the only place where Verstappen lost time was in that middle sector.
And understandably, those are down to setup choices. Those are down to
Yeah,
how much wing everyone's running. McLaren have brought a new rear wing to Spa, which allows them to have higher downforce efficiency even while running a lower wing. So this era of Formula One, which Red Bull, Adrian Newey, Max Verstappen started like they were the magicians. Now, literally seems like McLaren is the magicians. Whatever they throw onto the car is actually giving them performance, right?
performance.
Yes. And since we're talking of Piastri and Max, okay, very, very interesting. Sanjay is saying, I want to see Piastri and Max in the same team, a hypothetical situation, but it would be fun. And you know what? If Max keeps threatening to leave Red Bull, okay, maybe at some point they're going to listen and say, you know what, we can't just give you the de facto number one driver status. But I think that's way beyond the scope of this episode, though. That's also way beyond the scope of what Red Bull would do. I think right now Red Bull is clearly a one driver team, and Max is that the driver who's going to be there because the first race without Christian Horner, Laurent Mekies has made changes in how the simulator prep is done. Red Bull had a very clean Friday. No longer, those sort of magic updates and setups they need to make to get the jump between Friday and Saturday. That at least, that's what we saw today. So I'm eager to see how Loro goes. But yeah, Max and Oscar as teammates would be absolutely blockbuster stuff.
Fireworks. And that's the interesting thing, actually. You know what? Max Verstappen is that little glue that's still making Red Bull exciting and relevant. So imagine if he's not there in that car next year and pulling out these sort of masterclass laps, and if the true pace of that car is somewhere in P6, P7, or P10, no one would really be talking about Red Bull for that matter. So that's the thing. Max Verstappen doing these sort of laps, we'll watch that throughout the season all year long.
Yes. And, I like that whether there's Christian Horner or not, this was still a Red Bull kind of operation. They've been
Yeah, yeah,
spot on with
yeah.
lots of things. It's not that it's suddenly all over the place. Of course, removing one person from a 1,000 plus team doesn't mean that the team's going to fall apart. But I think a fairly good day for Red Bull
Yeah.
in the post Christian Horner era. And interesting
Especially a
news.
sprint weekend, one practice session only.
Exactly. And I remember back in 2022 and 2023, the best time or the easiest it would get to beat Red Bull was a sprint weekend because they could get it wrong and you could get it right, and
Yeah.
you could end up scoring a win on them. That's what teams used to joke about. We used to joke about as well. But Christian Horner was apparently more news that came in from the paddock was Max kept saying that I will leave in 27 if you don't have a fast car in 2026. And he and Christian Horner were not able to agree on certain scenarios. And that's why if you
Mhm.
see Sundaram, Max has always said it's always about a fast car. We need to have a fast car this race. We need to have a fast car this season. And then he's also given away that hint that he'll be at Red Bull Racing in 2026 by saying we need a fast car next season as well. So he is willing to give Red Bull Racing that chance to give him that fast car in 2026 and then be like, guys, if it's not a fast car, I will move elsewhere in 2027, which is pretty much what Sebastian Vettel did at that time, right? And Fianchu saying, Max said, at least we got one of them, which is one of the McLarens, which is
Yeah.
obviously what makes Max Verstappen fantastic. But we should move on. It's 15 minutes to the clock. Lewis Hamilton spin, SQ1 disqualification. This is, I think every time there's a
Everyone's
sprint,
talking about this.
yeah. Everyone's also talking that every time it's a sprint weekend, Ferrari's hopes are higher and they can run the car lower in sprint
Lower.
race because they won't get disqualified, new suspension and so on. And then the debate is, was it the car, was it the driver? Actually, it doesn't matter because both need to fire, right? And Lewis saying, I spun. Frederick Vasseur saying Lewis probably slammed the brakes a little harder than expected. Some of the experts actually saying that because it's a rear suspension and he was braking in for the chicane, you actually change your brake bias to have more braking into the front. So what's it
Yeah.
with the rear losing out, locking up? The lockup is where the question was. But Lewis Hamilton spinning Charles Leclerc 7 tenths off from Oscar Piastri. And Charles actually said that we've got the new upgrade. The car feels better, but it's bittersweet for me because it feels better. But guess what? McLaren have just gone further away from us.
That's the interesting thing because of you're always going to compare yourself to your teammates. So in that sense, while Hamilton had a terrible SQ1, Leclerc on the other side, he's managed to put his car into P4. And like you said, there's been contrasting feedback with the new upgrades that's come. Leclerc did say that he's a little bit more optimistic. He did see the change in the feeling of the performance. So he's or it's down to a case of him being more adaptive of the new upgrades, while Hamilton is still not up to mark with the new suspension. But if you actually look at the sector times, Leclerc and Norris are not too far off, but still, just because of the pole margin that Oscar is able to pull out, that seems that much more bigger. Um, Maybe it's something that's very sparse specific. Maybe it's because they've had only one practice session. They've not been able to extract everything that they would have otherwise done with three practice sessions. Uh, the good thing for them is, I mean, everything is not really lost. You can still go back to changing a setup after the sprint session, but that would mean that they have to learn and learn in the correct direction in tomorrow's sprint. And hopefully Hamilton would want to have good sprint because he was absolutely downbeat in the post qualifying presser today. He was not at all happy with what the car felt like today.
Yeah. And I love that my Twitter is still going completely bonkers about me saying, because Lewis Hamilton made two driver errors in SQ1, if you think of
Yeah.
it. Because the first one, even though it was dirty air, gravel, etc.,
Yeah.
from Antonelli,
That's
uh,
understandable. That's more understandable when you have quite clearly something blocking your vision, and if you have lots of gravel going around, you would be a little cautious. That's understandable. But the hot lap is where you really have to get everything together.
what was not understandable for me was why Lewis Hamilton just stayed there. His engine was running; he
Yeah.
had not shut it. The team was telling him, he needs to shut down, and he said, "You know what? I can drive around in speed and try and cool the car down." So they were having that conversation. The FIA, I don't even know what flag they triggered at that time because there was this period where there was a yellow flag, but
There
drivers
was
were
no yellow
still
flag.
going by. Okay, and then there was a brief period when you saw the green flashing, and then there was a yellow flag again. So maybe the FI was just a little over the place with that. But Mercedes, the guys who
Oof.
won last year, almost had, not almost, they had a 1-2 before one was taken away and whatever. Kimi Antonelli spun in SQ1. Okay, very bold, went off, destroyed George Russell's lap as well. And then uh, George Russell's SQ2 exit, he actually said that the car was fine, but there was probably some more gravel that was stuck in his car, which was just slowing him down. So that one spin, which was a beautiful 360, if you ask a sailor, and that's the sailor in me talking, that Kimi Antonelli made, suddenly just got Mercedes out with two cars.
And I think that's very it's a little unlucky for them because I mean, first of all, you don't see someone spinning in that fashion at that part of the track. You often see people going off track because they get the racing lines wrong. But Kimi actually spinning brought a lot of gravel back onto the track. It also probably damaged his underfloor. It also damaged his tires because the next lap that he did, you could visibly see that his front left was having a lot of flat spots, and there was no balance in the car at all. So they couldn't go for a second set of tires because that's what the sprint shootout rules mandate. You're supposed to have only one set of tires of the medium. So he couldn't have gone in and changed tires to have a fresh set of mediums. But the moment he spun, I think that kind of ended all his hopes of making it to SQ2. And the fact that Russell was right behind him also, yeah, he was right behind him. It led to a little bit of damage, is also why he couldn't progress into SQ3. It just goes to show how much the floor is important in this era of these cars, that a little bit of damage to the underfloor can really hamper your overall pace as well.
Yes, and along with Antonelli, there was Lewis Hamilton who was out, Colapinto, Nico Hulkenberg. He's making this a habit, getting out in
He's big.
Q1 and then getting points and podiums and whatever. Because Sauber's had a brilliant upgrade that they brought in Spain, and since
Spain,
then
yeah.
they've scored what 35 points, making them the fourth highest team, fourth highest scoring for any team that's there. And of course, it's upgrades, upgrades, upgrades. That's what Formula One is all about. But there was also Albon who was out. Albon's mostly going to pick up
Mhm.
a power unit change because he said he already had power unit issues by the time he was in his car, and he strange, right? Because Carlos Sainz had a power unit issue in FP1. Albon has had so many power unit failures issues, and it's all down to the cooling package that the Williams is unable to offer to that Mercedes power unit. But one of the other things I liked was how well coordinated these teams are, because when SQ1 started, nobody was in a rush to go, right?
Mhm.
And then suddenly, I think it was 39 seconds on the
40
clock.
seconds.
Well, it was 40
Everyone
seconds.
came under.
Everyone came out. And the beauty of that is everyone's timing their laps. Everyone wants to be the
Mhm.
last one to go, because we saw such amazing track evolution. And the track evolution was so amazing that we got uh, Yuki Tsunoda, who put in a good lap, eliminated in SQ2. George Russell went away. Fernando Alonso went away. Lance Stroll is always away. And then there was Liam Lawson, who also missed SQ3 by, I think, four hundredths or thereabouts. So track evolution was so brilliant. And I saw all the top teams leaving and the midfielders just waiting, because they were like, we're going to just wait and see how we go. And then they went quicker, and they went so much quicker that there was almost a chance where Lando Norris, had he not done double laps on that medium tire, he would have actually been eliminated in SQ2 itself, right? And so on. But midfield drivers, and we should really talk about Sundaram. And I'm going to read the names: Ocon, P5, Carlos Sainz, P6, the best qualifying for Haas and Williams, especially in sprint qualifying. Oliver Bearman, P7, Pierre Gasly, P8, Isaac Hadjar, P9, and my favorite qualifier these days, Gabriel Bortoleto,
Mhm.
in P10. This means that SQ3 had 6 drivers from the midfield and just 4 drivers from the top. And like you pointed out, it was just Mercedes and Aston Martin who missed out from having a presence in SQ3 today.
And that's the interesting aspect of today's qualifying session. See, I mean, we've seen the odd midfield driver make it into Q3 and then have a good Q2 as well. But then seeing a host of drivers, that too from so many different teams, you have even an Alpine, which is so astonishing because for a team that is just generally so much lower compared to the others in terms of engine output and engine power, for them around a track like Spa, which is so dependent on going full throttle, Pierre Gasly putting that car into Q3 yet again, it just goes to show how much he's managed to overdrive that car's benchmark as well. So that is super impressive. Gabriel Bortoleto is coming into his own, and he's done fairly well over the last couple of races as well. And Esteban Ocon, I mean, although they did try and make the most of track evolution, he was P4 in SQ2. He's eventually been best of the rest in SQ3, which is great for them because the midfield battle is so tight. Even if they're able to get where are they right now? P5, P7. Even if they're able to get like 2 or 3 points, that's massive for them in
Yeah.
their own championship.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And uh, I think the 2 previous sprint race pole sitters, which was Hamilton in Shanghai and Antonelli in Miami, got eliminated in SQ1. So such beautiful stories from the sessions today. But last couple of minutes before we,
And if you also see the grid, I mean, all these midfielders, Ocon, Sainz, Bearman, Bortoleto, Gasly, they have a good enough cushion to the others who would probably make up places tomorrow. So Russell's further down, Alonso Stroll further down, Hamilton and Antonelli way down. So who are they really going to be threatened by? So that's the big question. So it's very much likely that all these midfield teams could be in a very good position to score points tomorrow.
yes, and these drivers you just named, Bortoleto, Gasly, Bearman, Sainz, and Ocon, it's the first time that they appeared in SQ3 in this season. Flinny is asking what was Lando's response. Lando's response was actually like, I didn't drive well, but it's only Friday. And I just baffles me when it's so random a response. But yeah. And what else do we have? So then you mentioned Gasly and the engine output. No, there's another driver inside that was brilliant. In SQ1, Gasly was almost going to be eliminated, and he said, "Guys, tire warm up was an issue. The tires were too cold." And then the
Hmm.
team said, "Oh, that's a problem, easy to fix," and they fixed it from SQ2. And this is where driver experience comes in
Yeah.
so handy. Again, another driver experience that comes in handy. Isaac Hadjar in SQ1 said, "It's a one lap tire, even the medium." Okay,
Oh.
but Carlos Sainz went and did two laps on that medium tire. So experience counting yet another time. Gabriel Bortoleto was actually scared that he did not make it through to SQ3 because he suddenly asks his race engineer, "Are we in?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "We're through." He's like, "Okay, oh my God, I was scared because, he said, but I said you were through. So I don't know what you got scared about." So lots of interesting conversations that have happened today on the radio, on our channel as well. Quick circuit preview, because the the one thing that comes to my mind, and I've been lucky to be in Spa more than a couple of times, it's just reaching Spa is like a heavenly way of doing it. And just for kicks, one race weekend, Mithila and I decided to do it via public transport and walking. So we were hiking through the mountains, taking buses, getting off, walking kilometers in. But I think the best definition of Spa has always been a high speed roller coaster, because they've got those elevation changes of at least 100 meters, and you can actually see it, Eau Rouge sector 1 going up, sector 3 onwards coming down. And I just love what that circuit stands for in Formula 1, Sundaram.
And I'm often surprised that F1 doesn't really have longer contracts for Spa, and Spa is one of those iconic tracks. When you put it alongside a Silverstone and Monza, those tracks still are pretty much confirmed to stay on the calendar for a very long time. But it's always a sense of jeopardy around Spa. Is it going to be alternating? Is it going to be there? And it's baffling for me that such a beautiful track and such a challenging and technical track often does not have that sort of longevity. And one key aspect of Spa is the fact that it is spread across such a wide geographical area. There is rain forecast for this week. I'm not sure if it's forecast for tomorrow, but the fact that it is so spread out, you could have rain on one section of the track or very hard rain on one side, and on the other side it could be bone dry as well. So that's a very interesting thing that teams will have to balance out as well. And like I said, it's a very technical track. What you see in sector 1 and sector 3 is completely opposite to what happens in sector 2. And the fact is that if someone makes a mistake in sector 1, they have to go through a huge way back all the way to the pit lane for a change of tires or for a change of front wing. So if you're making a mistake, do not make it in the first sector. It's okay if you can do it in sector 3, but that's a very Spa characteristic right there.
And I know there is no pit stops in sprint races,
Yeah.
but even for Sunday race strategy, it is so crucial to pit on the exact lap that you need to pit on.
Oh
Otherwise, you have
yes.
7 kilometers of going around the mountains and then finally heading back into the pits. But I think I love so many corners. And Lewis Hamilton said he loves Pouhon. From an engineering point of view, Spa is actually a
Oh
combination
yes.
of very high speed corners with some very long straights. So you're always deciding what to take. Like you were pointing out, Sundaram, different teams have chosen different setups, and Spa has typically become a low downforce setup, especially with the wings, because you're generating so much more downforce from these from the underbodies of these cars, the floors of the car. I remember Spa also because it was Force India's first and only pole position back in 2009 with
Yes.
Giancarlo Fisichella. And
Were you there? Were you there
no,
trackside that
I
day?
joined. No, no, no. I joined just after that. Actually, I joined just
Mm.
after that. And yeah, and in general, I think it's the hundredth race for Lance Stroll with Aston Martin, with the new Aston
I missed
Martin.
that. I missed
Yeah,
that.
McLaren's last pole and last win were both in 2012, courtesy of Jensen Button. It's Mercedes' 600th race in Formula One as an engine supplier. And Red Bull Racing has actually had just one pole position here since McLaren's last pole, which was 2012. I know he took pole, but then he took grid penalties, and Max has done that a few
It's
times.
happened the last. It's
He-
happened the last 4 times.
yeah,
So
yeah.
he
So
has
he's
been the quickest around here, but he's had to take those penalties.
and that's how much he loves Spa. That he's even won here from what I think 14th or something a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but in general, what a gorgeous circuit. Eau Rouge, you exit La Source, you climb up Eau Rouge, go all the way to the Camel Straight, 1.9 kilometers or thereabouts of full throttle. That 23, 24 seconds of just blasting through the forest, and I think the sound just reverberates that much more because it's a forest that you're essentially going racing in. So yeah, that's what Spa is all about. Spa for him, Spa for her, Spa for everyone.
Oh, I'm missing that graphic this time out. I don't see that a lot, but we've seen that doing the runs on the internet a lot over the last couple of years. I've not seen that this weekend. But two things, two closing points on my side. Like since we're talking about the track, I think not enough is spoken about the elevation apart from the Eau Rouge and Radion section. The fact that it is, like you said, it's a high speed roller coaster, and the fact that there is an elevation change going upwards towards the first part and then downwards till the end of sector 2 and then upwards again. And once these, along with that elevation change upwards and downwards, you're throwing the car left, right, everywhere. It's a very difficult track which we as outsiders or people sitting uh, on an armchair over here are not able to understand the extent of how challenging the track like this can actually be. And one thing that you should definitely keep an eye out is the fact that there is no cool down lap around Spa-Francorchamps, which you will see, I think, at the end of the sprint as well, and definitely at the end of the Grand Prix. You don't have a victory lap, you don't have a cool down lap, so drivers will not be able to pick up the marbles at the end of the race. They'll have to ensure that they have the right amount of fuel and the right amount of weight still on the car at the end of the Grand Prix, so that they don't flout any of those rules that happened the last time. And the fact that Pirelli's also come up with what do you say, skipped compound for this weekend. So how strategy pans out in that sense is also going to be very, very interesting. And on top of that, add a little bit of rain as well. So it's going to be a very exciting rest of the weekend for us.
It is all the way from the start of the races. There are two races. That's one thing I love about sprint race weekends, that you have two starts, two opening laps, and the start is key. Would we ever see any more magic from Fernando Alonso? Asked not. I think there's always magic from Fernando, whether he's in the press conference
He's done some
saying,
magic in the press conference this time, actually.
yeah. With Colapinto, I love that. Cars are not as physically demanding now, so it's good for the younger guys.
No, he actually said after sprint qualifying today, I think one of the journalists asked them why did they lose out on pace in SQ2. So he was basically trying to hint the fact that I get up to pace with the car very quickly compared to these other drivers. They get to do it in a more step by step basis, and by the time they get up to speed, we generally lack overall pace in
Yeah.
general with the car. So that's what he was trying to hit. So it's never a dull day in Fernando Alonso's life, either on track, off track. He's giving us lots of magic either way.
He does. And I think tomorrow's sprint race, opening lap, I love the opening laps here because there are multiple cars you can take tow. You can take the tow from, all the way from exit of La Source. In fact, if you pull off the overtake too early, you could end up being
Yeah,
overtaken before the
correct.
Camel Straight ends as well. So, I love the challenge of Spa, which is why Oscar said Spa is probably the worst place to start from pole
Beyond
on
Paul.
because and I love that there could be literally four cars going wide into the Camel Straight, and
Camel straight,
that's
yeah.
something that's at the end of the Camel Straight. I think that's what I love about Spa. I know I've used the word love, but that's just the word that comes when I talk about Spa the most. The entry from the turning, sorry, the breaking point for turn one from the start is about 137 meters, which is a
It's a
third
short one. It's a very
shortest.
short one.
Yeah, I think Azerbaijan is shortest at 90 meters, and then maybe Las Vegas. They've just thrown everything at Las Vegas at 111
Mm.
or something like that. So I
It's also
suspect.
very it can also be a very chaotic first corner. We've seen that through the years that everyone's trying different racing lines, trying to break into the same corner. So it's very much possible that someone crashes into each other as well.
Yes. And we've seen this was a race 2018 where the halo actually saved
Yeah.
Charles Leclerc's life. It sort of just validated why we should have the halo. This was a race, the start that you're talking of, where Roman Grosjean created chaos, got a race ban for himself. And I don't think a race ban is coming up for anyone now. June is gone, and Max's penalty points being at 11 or whatever those points were is gone. He's down to 9 now. But
But if he still picks, he can still pick up a couple of points in
yeah,
this
yeah,
race
of
and the
course,
next
of
race.
course. But
Didn't Oliver Bearman get 4 penalty points in Silverstone
yes,
for? Yeah, so
it's
it's
still
still pretty much
possible.
possible.
Yeah, 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 no. So, what do you think is happening at the race tomorrow? In the race tomorrow, quick
I
prediction.
I think Piastri is getting it. I think he's taking he's taking the sprint victory tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think Charles Leclerc is a driver to watch out for. I know he loves Spa,
Hmm.
and they've always spoken of qualifying higher up the grid. This is slightly higher up than he would have typically had because George or Kimi would have sort of snuck in, including a Lewis or the likes. And I'd love to see what Leclerc is able to do. But just having Verstappen versus Piastri, and Verstappen with nothing to lose to prove why he's the reigning world champion against the possible world champion of 2025. That's what I'm looking forward
Yeah.
to. And also how Lando Norris bounces back, because it is still 2 points that if they just finish where they start, it is still 2 points that he'll end up losing to Oscar Piastri. And not just that, a lot of soul searching, a lot of head scratching, saying where did he pull that gap on me from, and so on. But that's what tomorrow's sprint is going to bring. We will be back with a sprint live stream. Hopefully, Somil Arora's antibiotics are helping him, and he's able to host the live stream because he definitely does a better job than I do, Sundaram. But any closing thoughts?
No, I'm just going to keep a close eye on what Lando Norris does tomorrow. Like you said, a lot of soul searching for him to do, but I just hope he doesn't experiment a lot in the sprint if he finds himself in a position not favorable for him, because we've discussed this at length. He's really someone who rides on confidence. So if he has a bad sprint, if he goes and makes a mistake, doesn't score enough points, that can actually, what do you say, affect his qualifying session tomorrow as well. So you get a handful of points in the sprint, but the main bunch of points will be only in the Grand Prix. So I don't think so. He really has to worry a lot about the sprint. 2 points is not a lot. Yeah, that's. I'm just going to keep an eye on what Lando Norris does tomorrow.
Will Esteban Ocon finish in the points? He said he had traffic, otherwise he was half a second quicker. I get a feeling Haas is in there to score points even in
Yeah,
in the sprint, which
double
is down
points, possibly even.
double points, just down to 8 finishers. And I'm also eager to see what setup changes the teams make, because what the sprint essentially does is it allows you to have a test of a race setup before you actually have the chance to change that again in front of before qualifying, because that's the rule that allows that. You have a sprint setup qualifying, which you or a sprint setup which you use for sprint qualifying and the sprint race, and Park Ferme opens up and you can make changes to the car for qualifying and the main Grand Prix. So I'm also eager to see what teams actually do after they learn things in the sprint race tomorrow. But on that note, we will see you tomorrow, and thank you very much for tuning in. Bye bye.